You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the former government special advisor Anita Boateng. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Sun reports that lawyers for Gillian Joseph, who's suing Prince Andrew over sexual assault allegations, have served him with legal documents. He strenuously denies any wrongdoing. That development is also the lead story for The Mirror. Likewise, it's the Mail's top story. The Telegraph hears that the government is considering council tax increases to pay for social care, in addition to controversial hikes to national insurance. The Guardian says GPs are struggling to guarantee safe levels of care due to a shortage of staff. Germany's Frankfurter Allgemeine remarks on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 tomorrow with the headline, "When the War Started." The Daily Express leads with the rollout of fast-track driving tests for lorry drivers in an attempt to prevent food shortages at Christmas. The Times understands that elections permitting Boris Johnson intends to be Prime Minister for at least a decade. The Financial Times reports that a US judge has ruled against Apple in a court battle over fees it charges for apps that take payments which don't go directly through the Apple Store. And the Star catches wind of a story about the emissions of genetically engineered cows. And we're joined tonight by Susie Boniface and Anita Boateng. Welcome to you both. Let's start with that story on the front of The Guardian and the fact that GPs are saying that they're struggling because of a lack of staff, and also the argument about remote consultations is brought into this piece. Susie.
Yeah, there's lots of people who've spent the last sort of year, 18 months criticising GPs and saying it's not fair. I demand the right to go and see him in person about the thing that's not really that bad. And also those who quite rightly complain that, they haven't been properly diagnosed because they haven't been able to get in to see their GP. And here we can see some of the reason for that, which is that, the paper there's reminding us in 2015, the government promised to hire 5,000 more GPs over the next 5 years. So we should have them by now, right? Only actually the numbers, they haven't got those 5,000, and the numbers dropped by a further 1,300. So the GP numbers are 5% below what they should be. And like anybody in any walk of life, if you're a TV presenter or a journalist or you're stacking shelves, whatever it might be, if there are fewer of you in the office doing the job, then the job you do have to do, you have to work harder, do it faster, do it for the same money, and don't do quite such a good job as you would do otherwise, which is why cutbacks everywhere are usually a terrible idea. And that's what's happened here. GPs are saying here that they just don't feel now as safe as they should be. And if the GPs don't feel safe, then the patients aren't going to feel any safer either, are they?
The article's pointing to Professor Martin Marshall, chair of the Royal College of GPs, and he's defending the growing use of remote consultations during the pandemic, Anita. But we have heard previously, I think in the last couple of days, from coroners saying that the deaths that they've seen are potentially due to the fact that patients couldn't see their GPs for face-to-face consultations in time.
Yes, it feels as though some of the quality and some of the nuance that perhaps you might be able to get via a face-to-face consultation is being lost via remote consultations. Look, the entire system has to have a degree of flexibility because obviously, I think the thing that Susie's probably missed from that account is the growing demand that's being placed on GPs, both because of general population growth, backlog, and all the other things that are not really affected and the result of any government policy decisions. And so you need to get a balance between that increased efficiency that you might see with remote consultations and obviously the need for face-to-face contact to continue.
Let's move on to the Express, and this is a story that we've all been too aware of, the fact that it's being predicted that things are running out, the shelves are empty. What is the remedy to preventing our shelves being empty just before Christmas? Susie.
Well, according to the Daily Express, which campaigned loudly for Brexit, this hasn't had the word Brexit anywhere on the front page. It's blamed the shortage of drivers on the government not doing enough. And what, of course, the government hasn't done is allow visas for foreign drivers to come in and try and fill this shortage that we've got, at the very least in the short term. But more interestingly is if you kind of look elsewhere, and the Express isn't really mentioning it here, is that the chairman of the Food and Drink Federation said today, this isn't just a driver shortage issue. This is a problem of how our supply chains have been built over time. You know, the British economy was built in such a way that it was called just in time. All right. So whenever you went to the shop, you had anything you wanted in that shop, pretty much. And they were always delivered at the last minute. And being in the EU enabled that to happen. Because of the changes that have been brought about, the CEO of the Food and Drink Federation, Gillian Joseph, says that that's never going to happen again. Now, he does say it's a first world problem. For example, last week, I think people in the east of England weren't able to have deliveries of bottled water, which, of course, you can get out of the tap. It's not the end of the world not to have deliveries of bottled water. But it does mean that when you go to the shops, he says, forever from now on, not just at Christmas, not just because of a bit of a Brexit hiccup, but forever, our supply chains have been radically and fundamentally altered in the long term, and there will be shortages on shelves, he says, long past Christmas. And even if the government does actually provide some new licenses and testing here for HGV drivers, which is what this story is talking about, of course, that puts up prices for what you get on the shelves at Christmas, if they can get it there at all. So then you're looking at inflation, you're looking at your money not going as far as it should do. And a lot of people's Christmas is going to be significantly tighter and worse than it could otherwise be.
Anita, stories like this are going to lead to people panic buying, aren't they? I mean, we've seen it before in the early stages of the pandemic with people stocking up unnecessarily on toilet rolls. But stories like this now really could lead to a panic.
I'm not quite so doom and gloom about this. Obviously, when it comes to Christmas, lots of people do tend to buy a little more, and that puts pressure on the chain in general. Look, I think Susie makes an interesting point about the ways in which the way that we shop has been engineered over the past sort of 2 decades to ensure that we keep prices low and margins incredibly low. And that has made it very challenging for the model around delivery of food in particular to change. But I think part of the story that's missing probably from that account is really about the pay and conditions of some of these drivers that deliver the products that we rely on in that just-in-time way. And I think what we're really seeing here is some of that coming to a head, where the pay and conditions, as well as the pandemic, have forced people into different professions. And there needs to be a kind of consideration of what we can do in terms of that pay and conditions, the fundamental issue, to address what has led to a fall in supply of these drivers. And I think that fundamentally, we can do what we can do around ensuring that people can have those tests, but really it's the pay and the conditions that are going to make a difference to getting those lorry driver numbers up, to ensure that we have something that looks much more like what we're used to outside of COVID times.
Susie, to the Times, and contrary to what Dominic Cummings would have us believe, it seems the Prime Minister would like to stay in the job a little bit longer. Dominic Cummings was suggesting prior to this that he was actually sick of it and couldn't take the difficulty of the task. But what do we believe?
Well, it's not just Dominic Cummings. There's been a number of sort of leaks and so on from within Downing Street that have sort of said Boris Johnson likened the job of being Prime Minister as not being as much fun as he thought it was going to be, and likening it to sort of strapping a jumbo jet onto your back every morning and trying to drag it along the runway. And I think anybody who actually looks at the man can see that he doesn't look exactly in fine fettle. And it doesn't look like he's enjoying it that much, and also isn't having much fun, because all the things he would want to do that would be fun, mad bridges and airports and stuff like this, just aren't happening. And he's having lots of arguments and problems. However, what this story is about is saying Boris Johnson saying, I want to be in power for 11 years. And there's a minister who has briefed the Times about this, and he wants to go on longer than Thatcher, which some people are going to be crying blood over that idea. But really interestingly here, as with everything with Boris Johnson, you don't listen to what the man says, but you have to look at what the man actually does, because they're usually completely opposite things. And right next to this story on the front page, there's one about how major planning reforms have had to be utterly scrapped because he is going to lose seats right across the south if he carries on with the idea of allowing some of these planning reforms which would stop people objecting to new housing and so on and so forth. So that's big idea number one, straight out the window. And if you turn the page over, there's page 4, there's a huge piece about how Boris Johnson's going to have to decide whether or not to scrap the eastern leg of HS2. Now, it was already briefed that that was going to be scrapped. He's going to make a decision shortly. But again, it's another big project, another big scheme that he's not able to push through. He doesn't have the cash, doesn't have the political capital.
Look at the Telegraph front page, and this story will come as depressing reading to many families already reeling from the national insurance increase that they have to face. But now, according to the Telegraph, council tax bills will also increase come April, Anita.
Yes, I think this one is really, I mean, it's a pretty speculative story, but absolutely, given we know the way that the council tax is structured, there's likely to be some leeway for councils to raise the precept that people pay on their council tax, which could go towards supporting, again, social care. And I think that actually this is quite an important story in the context of the Conservative Party seeing some possible movements in the polls as a result of it, in my view, really gripping something that's been a challenge for almost a decade to ensure there's a better flow of funding and a broader base of funding for social care. And I kind of think that this is sort of what we want to see, which is investment both from local councils, but also from additional taxation.
Susie, government spokesmen are quoted as saying that we will ensure every council has the resources they need to deliver these reforms with extra money invested next year and £5.4 billion by 2024 to 25.
Yeah, it's not a particularly speculative story because it mentions here there is a clause within the announcement last week that says the cap on local authorities raising their council tax precept for social care may well be lifted in the budget next month. So it does look as though the tax rise we were sold as being the once in a lifetime sort of settlement for social care is not going to be anything of the sort. And we need to remember, of course, local authorities bore the brunt of about 50% of the austerity cuts, and they're the ones who provide social care. Unless
Susie,
the government hands money out, it's not going to work.
We are running out of time. Very quickly, Anita, tell us about the cows in the Star.
I think that what we're seeing is a possible new innovation. It's incredibly exciting. What we might see is cows being bred to sort of stop the ways in which their methane emissions massively affect climate change. So we might be saving the world one cow at a time.
Very well done, Anita. You didn't say the dreaded word that I think the Star have used. Thank you both.